My name is Sophia. I am 36 years old, and 20 years ago, my entire life was abruptly and ruthlessly shattered by the very people who were supposed to protect me. At the fragile age of 16, I learned the hardest lesson a child can ever learn. I learned that for some parents, a pristine upper-class reputation is far more valuable than their own flesh and blood. On paper, the Sterling family was absolute perfection. My father, Arthur, was a man obsessed with status. He constantly reminded us that a reputation takes decades to build but only minutes to destroy. My mother, Beatrice, orchestrated our lives like a theatrical performance, ensuring we always looked flawless for their elite social circle. But behind closed doors, their love was entirely conditional. Everything came crashing down on a freezing Sunday evening in November. I was a high school sophomore, and I was carrying a secret that was eating me alive. I was 8 weeks pregnant. The father was my high school boyfriend, Daniel. Daniel was kind and gentle, but he came from a working-class family on the other side of town, a place my parents pretended did not exist. I knew the storm that was coming, but I could not hide it any longer. We were sitting at the formal dining table. My father was complaining about a property investment, and my mother was planning a charity gala. I gathered every ounce of courage I had and finally spoke the words. I told them I was pregnant. The reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. The dining room went completely silent. My mother dropped her silver fork, her face draining of all color. But it was my father who truly broke my heart. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not offer any comfort or guidance. His voice was like ice as he coldly demanded to know the social background of the boy. When Arthur realized that Daniel was from a working-class neighborhood, the disgust on his face was unmistakable. He looked at me not as his vulnerable teenage daughter, but as a severe liability. To him, I was a walking scandal that would destroy his precious reputation. Without a shred of hesitation, he delivered a chilling ultimatum. He told me that if I decided to keep this baby, I would immediately cease to be a part of the Sterling family. I would be completely dead to them. Within hours, my reality was entirely erased. I packed a single suitcase with whatever clothes I could grab. My mother, Beatrice, did not shed a single tear. Instead, she marched me to the front entryway, opened the heavy oak door, and physically pointed me out into the freezing November rain. I stepped onto the front porch, the cold water instantly soaking through my thin sweater. I turned around, desperately hoping for a final moment of mercy from my own family. Instead, I looked up at the second-floor window. There, bathed in the warm light of the house I was no longer allowed to enter, stood my older siblings, Thomas and Olivia. They just watched me silently. They did not run down the stairs. They did not speak up to defend me. They simply watched their 16-year-old sister get ruthlessly discarded into the cold, dark night. As I stood there shivering alone on the pavement, clutching my single suitcase, I realized the devastating truth. They were happily sacrificing me to protect their false image, marking the brutal beginning of my journey into premature motherhood. As I stood shivering in that freezing November rain, I naively thought the worst was over. I thought the physical act of being thrown out of my childhood home was the deepest wound my parents could ever inflict upon me. But the sheer cruelty of Arthur and Beatrice did not stop at simply locking their pregnant teenage daughter out into the cold night. They were entirely terrified of the scandal I represented, and to ensure their precious social standing remained completely untarnished, they decided to take extreme legal measures to permanently erase me from their lives. Exactly 3 days after my traumatic eviction, while I was sleeping on a borrowed mattress and desperately trying to figure out how to survive, I received an envelope. It was sent via certified mail, requiring my physical signature upon delivery. My father, a highly successful and calculating real estate lawyer, decided to handle my existence exactly like a failed business transaction. Inside that heavy envelope was a formalized, notarized legal document that he had drafted the very night they kicked me out. Reading that airtight legal contract at 16 years old shattered whatever tiny fragment of hope I had left in my heart. The document explicitly demanded my immediate signature and stated in cold, clinical terms that I hereby forfeited all of my inheritance rights, but the absolute most chilling part was the specific clause regarding my unborn baby. The paperwork officially declared that the family bore absolutely no legal, financial, or moral obligation to me or to any child born to me in the future. With a few strokes of a pen and 3 pages of legal jargon, my father legally deleted his own daughter and his unborn grandchild from the family lineage before my baby even took a first breath. While I was holding those devastating papers and crying until I could not breathe, Arthur and Beatrice were already busy covering their tracks. To the elite society of our city, they fabricated a highly convenient and elegant lie. Whenever their wealthy friends, country club associates, or church members asked where their youngest daughter had gone, my parents put on their absolute best acting performance. They smiled warmly and told everyone that I had simply moved abroad to study in Europe. It was a perfect, neat little story that asked no further questions and invited absolutely no judgment from their powerful peers. By legally severing all ties and lying to their entire community, my parents successfully built their spotless, highly respected reputation directly upon the metaphorical grave of the daughter they had callously thrown away. They returned to their luxury cars, their charity galas, and their perfectly coordinated Sunday church outfits, completely abandoning me to navigate my pregnancy and my terrifying future entirely alone. While my parents were busy erasing my existence and hosting elegant dinner parties, I was thrust into a terrifying new reality. But despite their absolute best efforts to leave me with nothing, I was not entirely alone. In those dark early days following my brutal disownment, Daniel and I survived primarily on sheer grit and the incredible initial kindness of a neighbor named Mrs. Hudson. She was the only person on our street who saw me shivering in the rain and actually opened her door. After staying in her guest room for 2 weeks, Daniel and I managed to scrape together enough money to move into a tiny studio apartment in the city. It was situated right above a noisy laundromat, and the entire place constantly smelled of industrial bleach and secondhand hope. It was in that cramped, drafty room that we welcomed our beautiful daughter, Chloe, into the world. When I held her for the very first time, I made a silent vow that I would never, ever make her feel as worthless as my parents had made me feel. For the first 5 years of Chloe's life, we barely scraped by. Our existence was a relentless blur of absolute survival. Daniel was the most incredibly devoted partner and father. He worked grueling double shifts as a mechanic at a local auto repair shop, coming home with his hands stained with grease but his eyes full of love for us. While he worked himself to the bone, I stayed up late into the night completing my education and caring for our little girl. We lived on cheap noodles and day-old bread, constantly pushing our dreams of a real wedding into the distant future. Then, in an instant, this fragile but deeply loving life was entirely shattered. It happened on a rainy morning. Daniel was commuting home from an exhausting night shift when a reckless delivery truck driver completely ran a red light. The police officer who stood on my doorstep later that morning told me that Daniel had been killed on impact. He was only 26 years old. At just 22 years old, I was suddenly left as a profoundly grieving single mother with a 4-year-old daughter. The financial reality of his death was just as devastating as the emotional one. My only safety net was the incredibly meager $12,000 life insurance policy Daniel had through his mechanic job. $12,000 for the entire life of a good, hard-working man. With my parents having legally and emotionally completely abandoned me, I had absolutely no family to call upon for support. I faced a crushing, suffocating poverty and a grief so profound I could barely breathe. But every single time I looked at Chloe, I saw Daniel looking back at me, driven by an unyielding determination to protect my little girl from ever feeling the sharp pain of abandonment. I flatly refused to give up. Instead of letting the darkness consume me, I channeled my immense sorrow into an intense, unstoppable drive to survive, determined to build a life where we would ultimately thrive. That $12,000 was never going to last us forever, and the crushing weight of reality demanded that I find a way to provide for my daughter. Refusing to be defeated by my heartbreaking circumstances, I managed to build a staggeringly successful corporate empire directly from the ashes of my profound tragedy. I had always possessed a natural, raw talent for making even the smallest, most broken spaces feel warm and inviting, perhaps because I was so desperately trying to create a true home for Chloe. I began by doing extremely small interior design projects, I decorated cramped apartments for my neighbors and eventually started staging modest homes for local real estate agents who were willing to take a chance on a grieving single mother with absolutely no professional credentials. People started telling me I had a unique gift, and I threw myself into that work like my life depended on it, because it truly did. My massive professional breakthrough finally arrived a few years later when I attended a local design workshop and crossed paths with a woman named Clara. She was a highly respected, recently retired creative director who possessed an incredibly sharp eye for talent. For reasons I still deeply appreciate today, she looked at my portfolio and chose to help me. She recognized my raw potential, telling me my work was unpolished but incredibly real, and she generously offered me her invaluable mentorship. With Clara providing expert guidance and after surviving 3 grueling rejections to finally secure a hard-won small business loan, I officially founded my very own interior design firm. We started out in a tiny, windowless converted closet inside a shared community workspace. Through years of relentless dedication and sleepless nights, what began in that tiny closet eventually expanded into a massive enterprise. Today, at 36 years old, I sit in a beautiful corner office overlooking the city skyline. My company proudly boasts 22 dedicated employees and generates an impressive $4.2 million in annual revenue. My incredible journey of resilience eventually caught the attention of the local media, leading to a prominent feature article in a major city magazine. The journalist spent days interviewing me, and I spoke completely candidly about my agonizing struggles as a teenage mother, the devastating loss of Daniel, and my relentless climb from poverty. However, when it came to my parents, I made a very calculated decision. I completely omitted the specific names of Arthur and Beatrice, leaving out the Sterling family name entirely. I did not do this to protect their pristine upper-class reputation. I did it to fiercely protect Chloe from their toxic, destructive influence, refusing to let anyone connect my beautiful daughter to the cruel people who had so desperately tried to erase her from existence. Despite my careful efforts to remain completely disconnected from them, the catalyst for our present-day conflict emerged from a completely delusional and narcissistic lie fabricated entirely by Arthur and Beatrice. They had somehow come across that exact City magazine article detailing my massive business success and my difficult journey as a young single mother. However, reading the article with astonishing carelessness, my mother Beatrice simply saw the word child and completely jumped to her own wild conclusions. Because of her deep-rooted traditional views, she automatically assumed that I had given birth to a highly successful son. Eager to capitalize on this fabricated success, my parents immediately constructed an elaborate fictional narrative about a brilliant entrepreneurial grandson. They enthusiastically spread this completely fake story among their elite church congregation and their wealthy social club friends. They spent months aggressively bragging about this imaginary boy to artificially elevate their own social standing in the community. They painted a beautiful picture of a young man continuing the prestigious Sterling family legacy, completely ignoring the devastating fact that they had legally and formally erased my baby from that exact same legacy 20 years prior. For them, this imaginary grandson was nothing more than a shiny new accessory to proudly show off to their peers. Their calculated lies worked perfectly at first until reality finally began to catch up with them. As their highly publicized 50th wedding anniversary party rapidly approached, their elite friends began asking very persistent questions. People wanted to know more details about his life and his impressive career. They were demanding to finally meet this legendary grandson they had heard so much about over the past few months. Cornered entirely by their own massive web of lies, Arthur and Beatrice realized they were facing a catastrophic social nightmare. They desperately needed to produce the fictional boy to save themselves from intense public humiliation at their upcoming anniversary gala, which was scheduled to host 200 of their most powerful peers, including the mayor and church board. Their pristine reputation, the very thing they had ruthlessly sacrificed me to protect, was now on the verge of total collapse because of their own greed and vanity. This absolute desperation to save face in front of their wealthy friends is what finally drove them to seek out the daughter they had completely thrown away 2 decades ago. Driven by that pure desperation to maintain their flawless social facade, my parents actually tracked me down and showed up at my doorstep after 20 years of absolute silence. I had just gotten home from a long day at work when I saw their luxury car parked outside my house. Walking up to my front door, I was entirely unsure of what to expect, but I decided to let them inside my living room because I deeply needed to know exactly what 2 decades of abandonment had finally led to. Sitting on my sofa, my mother maintained her rigid posture while my father immediately began treating the situation like a simple real estate transaction. They completely ignored the immense pain they had caused me and instead offered a callous and highly insulting bribe. My father calmly opened his leather briefcase and placed a check right on my coffee table. Looking me directly in the eyes, he casually offered me a staggering $250,000 along with a promised full reinstatement into the family multi-million-dollar estate trust. The conditions for this massive financial payout were sickeningly clear. In exchange for the money, my parents demanded that I bring my highly successful son to their upcoming 50th anniversary party. They wanted us to act as living props for exactly 3 hours, taking happy family photos and publicly validating their 20 years of lies in front of 200 powerful guests, including the city mayor and their church board. They genuinely believed that 2 decades of heartbreak and trauma could simply be purchased and swept under the rug just to save their pristine reputation. The sheer audacity of my parents reached its absolute peak when my 19-year-old daughter Chloe suddenly walked down the stairs, holding her college textbooks. Seeing a beautiful young woman instead of their imaginary grandson completely shattered their narcissistic delusion. My mother stared in sheer horror, while my father stammered, trying to comprehend that the child they had thrown away was actually a fiercely intelligent granddaughter. However, they were entirely unfazed by this massive revelation. Instead of feeling any genuine shame or remorse, my father immediately tried to pivot their elaborate lie. Assessing the unexpected situation like a broken business contract, he quickly suggested that Chloe could simply pretend to be a secret relative who had been studying abroad in Europe. They actually wanted my beautiful daughter to lie to 200 people about her entire existence just to protect their fragile social standing. It was in that exact moment, watching them desperately try to drag my innocent child into their toxic web of lies, that I finally realized I could no longer just stay silent. After my parents finally retreated to their luxury car, leaving their disgusting $250,000 bribe on my coffee table, I sat in my living room completely consumed by anger. They actually expected my beautiful daughter Chloe to lie to 200 people about her entire existence just to protect their fragile social standing. While I was contemplating exactly how to handle this incredibly toxic situation, my phone suddenly began to ring. The caller ID displayed an unknown number, but something compelled me to answer it. When I heard the voice on the other end, my breath caught in my throat. It was my older brother, Thomas. For 20 long years, Thomas had remained completely silent, never once reaching out to see if I was even alive. Hearing his voice now, weathered by time and heavily burdened by immense guilt, was completely unexpected. Speaking with deep, profound remorse, Thomas finally admitted his ultimate cowardice. He formally apologized for failing me when I needed him the most, confessing that he and our sister Olivia had watched me get thrown out into the freezing November rain from their upstairs window without doing a single thing to intervene. He told me that the crushing guilt of his silence had eaten away at him for 2 decades. During this highly emotional and crucial conversation, Thomas exposed the full pathetic extent of our parents' massive delusion. He confirmed that they had been desperately dining out on the imaginary grandson story for months. Beatrice had read the magazine article about my business, completely jumped to her own narcissistic conclusions, and actively invented a brilliant grandson to brag about to their wealthy social club friends. They had painted themselves into a corner with their own elaborate lies. But then Thomas revealed a critical piece of tactical information that changed absolutely everything. He warned me that the upcoming 50th anniversary party was not just a private dinner. It would feature a highly public family moment that was officially scheduled to be live-streamed directly to the massive social media page of their elite church congregation. There would be hundreds of powerful people in the room, and thousands more watching online. Before we hung up, Thomas made a promise I never thought I would hear. He promised that both he and Olivia had finally recognized the deeply toxic nature of our upbringing. They were completely ready to stand firmly by my side if I chose to attend the party. This completely unexpected alliance provided me with the ultimate tactical advantage. I realized that I did not need to hide anymore. Their precious, highly publicized anniversary gala was going to provide me with the perfect public stage to finally expose the devastating truth. After hanging up the phone with my brother Thomas, the reality of the situation finally settled in. Knowing that their 50th anniversary party was going to be broadcast on a public live stream to thousands of people gave me the ultimate clarity. I knew exactly what I had to do, but I could not just walk into that luxurious ballroom empty-handed. I needed to gather an undeniable arsenal of truth to permanently dismantle my parents' perfectly constructed lies. That very night, after Chloe went to sleep, I walked into my bedroom and pulled a heavy fireproof lockbox from the deep back of my closet. I had not opened this box in years. Inside were the literal documents of my complete erasure. My hands shook slightly as I retrieved the original notarized letter of disinheritance that Arthur had so callously mailed to me 20 years ago. Reading it again as a 36-year-old woman still made my blood run cold. The cruel legal language was meticulously designed to be absolutely airtight. It explicitly stated that I forever forfeited all claims to the family estate and that they bore absolutely no legal or moral obligation to me or any dependents thereof. Those specific words meant they had legally and intentionally erased my beautiful unborn child from existence before she ever took her first breath. I carefully photographed every single page to use as concrete evidence, but legal paperwork alone was not enough to show the horrific reality of what they actually did to me. I needed something visual. I needed a witness. Early the next morning, I contacted Mrs. Hudson, the incredibly kind neighbor who had originally taken me in 20 years prior. When I explained the disgusting bribe and the elaborate lie about an imaginary grandson, she was entirely outraged. I took a deep breath and asked her if there was any possible way she still had the security camera footage from that freezing November night. In a stroke of absolute incredible luck, Mrs. Hudson, maintaining the highly meticulous habits of a retired schoolteacher, had actually preserved the files for 2 decades. Within 20 minutes, she quickly emailed me an attachment. It was a grainy but completely undeniable time-stamped photograph clearly showing a soaked, terrified 16-year-old girl standing completely alone on a porch with a single suitcase while her parents threw her away into the dark. Mrs. Hudson even eagerly agreed to attend the party as my official witness to verify the truth. With these explosive pieces of concrete evidence firmly secured, I sat down at my dining room table and formulated a brilliant plan with my mentor Clara and my daughter Chloe. I looked at the undeniable proof laid out before us and firmly decided exactly what we were going to do. I was going to use their precious, highly publicized stage to simply stop being invisible. I was finally fully prepared to crash that anniversary gala, face their 200 elite guests, and show the entire world the absolute undeniable truth about the Sterling family. Saturday evening finally arrived and the climax of our story unfolded at the incredibly luxurious Crystal Ballroom of the City Hotel. The massive space was filled with 200 formally dressed guests clutching champagne flutes and making polite small talk. There were huge, sparkling chandeliers and expensive flower arrangements on every single table. At the front of the room, a live camera crew was actively broadcasting the anniversary event directly to the massive church congregation's social media page. Just as my father, Arthur, stood under the bright lights and began giving a deeply hypocritical speech about how family is everything and how he and Beatrice built their entire lives around that exact principle, Chloe and I confidently marched right into the crowded room. Whispers immediately began spreading across the ballroom as several elite guests recognized me from the prominent City magazine article. My mother saw me first, and her completely fake smile instantly froze in sheer terror. Arthur followed her panicked gaze and completely stopped speaking mid-sentence. Without a single ounce of hesitation, I boldly walked through the parted crowd and climbed the 3 steps to the brightly lit stage. I smoothly took the microphone directly from the hand of my frozen father and turned to face the completely bewildered audience and the thousands of people actively watching the live stream online. I calmly introduced myself as their youngest daughter, Sophia. I told the entirely silent room that I had never gone to Europe to study. Instead, I explained the devastating reality that exactly 20 years ago my parents discovered I was pregnant at 16 and ruthlessly threw me out into the freezing street. Reaching into my bag, I pulled out the original notarized disinheritance letter and held it right up to the live stream camera lens for everyone to clearly see. I publicly exposed how they came to my house just last week and offered me a $250,000 bribe to parade a completely fictional grandson around this exact party just to cover up their elaborate lies. Then my brave 19-year-old daughter Chloe took the microphone from my hands. She looked directly out at the massive crowd and confidently introduced herself as the unwanted granddaughter. She totally dismantled their fictional grandson narrative, telling the elite guests that she had known her entire life that her grandparents chose their precious social reputation over her very existence. When Arthur desperately tried to grab the microphone back to spin the narrative and calm the outraged crowd, something incredible happened. My older siblings, Thomas and Olivia, boldly stepped forward out of the crowd and walked right up onto the stage. Standing firmly beside me, Thomas publicly confirmed to the audience that every single word I said was the absolute, undeniable truth. He confessed to the entire room that he and Olivia had watched our parents throw a pregnant 16-year-old girl into the rain and did absolutely nothing to help. In mere minutes, my parents' entire false reputation completely crumbled into dust right before their eyes. As we walked out of that luxurious crystal ballroom and stepped into the crisp November evening, I finally felt like I could truly breathe for the very first time in 20 years. Behind us, the immediate fallout from our spectacular public confrontation was incredibly swift and totally devastating for Arthur and Beatrice. By midnight, the live stream video of my confession had gone massively viral, accumulating thousands of views and completely shattering their pristine social standing. The very reputation they had ruthlessly sacrificed me to protect was entirely destroyed by the undeniable truth. Within days, Arthur was immediately forced to resign in deep disgrace from his prestigious church position and faced severe public backlash from his elite social clubs. Their wealthy friends, the same people they had lied to for 2 decades about an imaginary grandson, completely turned their backs on them. However, I made it abundantly clear to everyone that my actions that night were fundamentally about basic survival and setting firm boundaries, not about malicious revenge. Before I left that stage, I looked directly at my parents and told them I was absolutely refusing to sue them or demand a single penny of their money. I did not want their multi-million-dollar trust fund. I actively chose to simply walk away, keeping the original disinheritance papers not as a weapon, but as a permanent reminder of who they really are. I returned to the beautiful, highly successful life and the design empire I had built entirely on my own from the ashes of my profound tragedy. I proved once and for all that I did not need their conditional love or their dirty money to be someone of immense worth. In the emotional aftermath of that explosive night, I hosted a massive, joyous Thanksgiving dinner at my own home. As I looked around my large dining table, my heart was completely full. The seats were not filled with my toxic parents, but with my true, chosen family. Sitting beside me was my brilliant daughter Chloe, the beautiful child they had tried to legally erase. Also at the table was my loyal mentor Clara, who saw my potential when I had absolutely nothing, the heroic Mrs. Hudson, who opened her door to a terrified 16-year-old girl in the freezing rain, and my deeply remorseful siblings, Thomas and Olivia, who were finally learning how to break free from our toxic upbringing. We laughed, we shared stories, and we celebrated the incredible life we had built together. Ultimately, my 20-year journey proves one undeniable truth. The family you actively choose to build is often far stronger and far more loving than the toxic one you were merely born into. If you are watching this, and you are in a situation where your family makes you feel like you need to shrink yourself to be acceptable, or if they treat your existence as a burden, please hear me right now. You do not need their validation to know your immense value. Setting strict boundaries against toxic people is not an act of revenge, it is an absolute act of survival. You have the power to stop asking for permission to exist and start building a beautiful life that belongs entirely to you. If my story resonated with you, or if you have ever had to walk away from a toxic environment to protect your own peace, please hit that like button, leave a comment sharing your own journey, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilience. Remember, you are always enough, and your true family is out there waiting for you.